Hello and welcome back to Coffee Kurosawa, where a film obsessive sits down with a film fan to talk about film. I am Ben Filipkowski, your resident film obsessive.
And I am Farrah Sarpkaya, a person who loves film, but like in a super chill, I'm planning to run a heist in D&D and need some inspiration sort of way.
So, Farah, speaking of film, what have you been watching?
Well, some of it's been filmed, some of it has not been. We just finished The Penguin, and we are loving the characters, the attention to detail, and of course, Kristen Melody as Sophia Falcone is incredible. And as we are recording just after Halloween, I also watched the original and remake of Amityville Horror because I listened to a podcast about it and didn't remember until I was watching that Ryan Reynolds was in it. And of course, I watched this week's movie on Friday night.
Nice. By comparison, in addition to watching the best sitcom of all time, Frasier, for the billionth time, I also watched this episode's movie 3 whole times in anticipation. I watched it once like a normal person and twice with cast and crew commentaries because that's who I am. I love it. That movie is Ocean's 11. To be clear, the 2001 version, not the 1960 version. This movie was directed by Steven Soderbergh, stars George Clooney, Brad Pitt, Julia Roberts, and pretty much half of Hollywood new and old, and is rated PG-13. So this is one of my favorite movies of all time, Farah, so I'm going to flip it to you. What did you think?
So I have seen Ocean's 11 as well as the sequels as well as the original, which I'll be honest, I was kind of surprised you didn't want to do the Rat Pack version, but I'm definitely not complaining about it. I love a good heist movie, and this is a classic, and maybe even more than the original one. All I could think of, though, during the whole assembling the team montage was Seven Samurai, so you kind of ruined it for me in the best way, and I am convinced that Matt Damon is our cute, naive samurai, and look forward to him falling in love with some cute waitress. Sidebar, I love a good Bourne movie as much as The Next Girl, but I really miss the, nerdy Matt Damon, because he plays it so well, and this made me want to go watch Good Will Hunting again, and put it on our list for, next season or something. Anyways, I enjoy how little this movie takes itself seriously. I love the lack of drama, and they're just professionals doing their jobs. Mostly. With the odd little slip up. And quite frankly, heist movies nowadays are so serious a lot of the time, and they're all about, betrayal among thieves, and, there's interpersonal drama and all this stuff. But this is just, a fun little mashup of prep and execution with, some flirting thrown in, just a little bit for good measure, and the cast is spectacular and just gives the impression of folks having a good time doing their jobs, and, I love that for them. And, of course, the question is, am I talking about the actors or the thieves when I say that? And the answer is yes. Yes, I am.
Yeah, we'll get into, the actors having a good time because there were some great stories on those commentaries about that. Before we dig in, I'm going to give us a quick little summary of this movie. I had a page-long detailed summary, and it was just way too much because I was trying to capture all the little heist bits, and it just... Go watch the movie.
It's too
much easier. So movie summary. New Jersey. Winter. State prison. No, it's not a Bruce Springsteen song. Danny Ocean sits down for his parole hearing. Parole board asks him why, after being implicated in, I believe, over a dozen cons and schemes, he got caught and convicted this one time. Danny chalks it up to a self-destructive pattern after his wife left him. If released, is it likely you'd fall back into a similar pattern? The board asks. Well, she already left me once. I don't think she'd do it again, just for kicks. Upon release, Danny reconnects with his old pal, Rusty Ryan. They head to Vegas to pitch a heist to wealthy pal, Ruben Tishkoff. Steal from 3 casinos, all in one night, all 3 of which share a vault. During fight night in a couple of weeks, they estimate they'll have over $150 million in cash in their impenetrable underground vault.
Quote unquote.
Yeah. When Ruben clocks that these are arch nemesis Terry Benedict's casinos, he's in, even if he thinks this is a bad idea. But they're going to need a team. That team's going to need not just 3 guys, not just 7 samurai. No, they'll need a full crew of 11 guys. They recruit. This is a big list, so bear with me. Con man Frank Catton, retired con man Saul Bloom, auto specialists Virgil and Turk Malloy, explosives expert Basher Tarr, surveillance technician Livingston Dell, acrobat Yen, and pickpocket Linus Caldwell. The team makes a replica of the vault and starts casing one of the casinos. Linus, tasked with tracking Benedict, spots Benedict's new girlfriend, who just so happens to be Danny's ex, Tess. Uh-oh! Drama, complication. The heist kicks off. The stakes have never been higher. Will our crew succeed? Spoilers, yes. For our purposes here, it unfolds in a series of slick montages that loop us in on every moving part of the job, past, present, and future, for what is truly a flawless heist. Suffice to say, Danny wins Tess back, the crew make off with the cash, and even though Danny's got to serve a short prison sentence for violating parole, they all come out ahead of the game. Except for the problem of Benedict's goons tracking their every move. But that's another movie.
So, the thing that we're focusing on in today's conversation is editing. And that feels funny to say because when you messaged me about it, you were like, it's kind of broad, but like, it's fine. And I watched it and I was like, oh, I understand now. And the main thing that made me realize, oh, I get it now, was a car air freshener that they zoom in on one of the cars early on during the heist planning.
Yeah.
And then zoom in on later when the SWAT team is driving away. And I was just like, God, that... Because it turns out our intrepid heroes, villains? Thieves, are the SWAT team. So talk to me about why editing was the choice and why that was what you really wanted to focus on for this movie.
Yeah, so editing in this movie is incredible because of how it is used to build the narrative. You have all sorts of really interesting cuts, transitions, and shots used to kind of pull us through the story. And it's employed in such a way to create a sense of rhythm and a sense of pacing that kind of keeps the energy up, keeps things moving. Listening to the director commentary with Soderbergh, he talked a lot about this concept that he has in his mind of rhythm and release. So it is that idea of you're kind of being not so much swept up, but there's like a pace to things that he's trying to hit. And then there's a pause where you get that release. You get, whether it's a laugh or a dramatic beat or just a beautiful shot, he kind of like slows it down. So it's about speed and slowness. Editing is really how you shape so much of that. And I think in particular, talking about editing for this movie, this is really interesting detail. Soderbergh talked a lot about how ruthless an editor he was when making this. He cut out so much character stuff. Like, we did not get a ton of time with our supporting cast. So showing it to test audiences, he found the test audiences were saying, well, no, like, we get, like, the plot's cool. We want more of, like, the characters. We want more of their dynamics together. So he wound up putting all this stuff that he cut back in. As a result, there's, like, maybe one deleted scene for this movie. And maybe two. I don't know. I don't think there are many on the extras section when I go to watch this. One thing that is notably cut, if you watch the original trailer for it, is that opening scene of Danny at the parole board. They're asking him, like, what do you think you'd do if you were released? And it just lingers on silence, and he's got like maybe a tiny little smile on his face, and then it cuts to, he's leaving the prison. In the trailer, that scene, we get what his answer is. And his answer is, well, I don't know, how much do you guys make? And then it cuts. So, which is a good laugh, but it changes the energy a little bit. So that's like one of the very few things that was cut and left on the cutting room floor. So, and I mean, also just watching this, there's also this kind of, and we can get into this later on. I don't have a ton of experience talking about this technique in particular, but there's this idea of hyperlink cinema, which is this modern technique wherein a movie's got a ton of like complex narrative structures under a single unifying theme. Soderbergh does this a lot, and it's very kind of like mellow in this movie because it is those montages and those kind of like once more with clarity reveals to show us how the heist worked. He also does it exceptionally well in the movie Traffic, which has got all these kind of like intersecting storylines that touch each other but aren't necessarily, this character's just doing one thing, but they're buddies over here. There's separate storylines that wind up coming together thematically and touching each other that way.
It, I don't follow directors, obviously. That's just not who I am as a person. But the fact that this is the same director as with Traffic makes so much sense. Just, I'm like, yeah, that tracks, because it really does have a very similar. I think you used the word montage at one point. The whole movie feels like a montage, but not like in a disjointed, like mid-aughts, late-aughts music video kind of way. In like in like a very intentional, here's a bunch of short stories, and this is how it all comes together at the end, and it's just so satisfying.
Yeah.
That everything falls into place.
Yeah, and I mean, like, that's the point of montage, is that it's meant to be this thing where you get a bunch of related images coming together to tell a bigger story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're getting all these smaller things that are pulled together to tell something larger. I don't know if you know Steven Soderbergh's filmography, but what has he done? He did Aaron Brockovich, Traffic, Ocean's 11, one after the other in that case. Ocean's 12, Ocean's 13. He did the Che Guevara movies with Benicio del Toro. He did Magic Mike. He did Logan Lucky. He did High Flying Bird, The Laundromat. This guy has range.
Yeah, I was gonna say Magic Mike. I mean, I guess there are montages in there, but that seems off the not off the mark, but a bit of an outlier. So talk to me about this use of editing and kind of montage and how we see it in film. Did we see a lot of this work before, like this style before? Like, is this kind of a icebreaker, if you will, for this kind of piecemeal storytelling?
Maybe not an icebreaker. If I remember right, Sergei Eisenstein was a Soviet director in the 30s and 40s who really pioneered the use of montage. So that's like kind of like one of my there's a word I'm looking for, like the epitome of montage, or like the kind of like the founding concept there. And so it gets employed throughout a ton of different movies, and it's typically done to show the passage of time. Like we saw it in Citizen Kane as well. There's the montage of Kane and his first wife having the conversation across timelines and across the dinner table. So that's a neat little bit of montage as well. It gets employed a lot in kind of, I suppose, nonfiction ways over the years. Like documentary is going to use montage extensively. News programming will use montage extensively. But this, I would say, is probably Ocean's 11 is probably one of the. I think that's a really good question. I don't know if this is like necessarily breaking new ground, but it is kind of. This is really putting Soderbergh on the map in a much bigger way than he was before. He got a lot of attention for his indie work, and that. But this is certainly like he's done a few big, air quotes, big movies. I think this is probably easily the biggest movie he had done up to that point. It might be just because of the sheer star power of the cast, but you know, all the same, it really puts him on the map in a different sort of way, and I think opens the door for him to be a lot more experimental in his kind of Hollywood leanings.
Yeah, that's fair. So let's talk about the actual editing that happens. And I think the biggest one for me outside of the air freshener is the point at which Rusty, so that would be Brad Pitt's character, he calls the manager of the casino and he's like, "Hey man, we have some bombs on your money. Carry that out and put it in a van, and we're gonna drive it away, and we won't blow up your money, but we're gonna take the cash that we've got." And instead, he calls in a SWAT team. SWAT team comes, of course. His people also follow the van, and it is revealed that it's not, in fact, money in the vault. It's a bunch of advertisements for entertainers, if you will. And same with the van. Both of them blow up. And you have little cards with ladies of the night absolutely everywhere. And finally, we get to the point where we, the audience, catch up with the heist.
Mm-hmm.
We finally see, it's actually our favorite thieves were actually the SWAT team who carried out the money just straight out, easy peasy, not a worry in the world.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the effectiveness of that, and not just that, the keeping us, the audience, in the dark about it, to create that satisfaction at the end when we're finally let in on the secret.
Yeah, the movie plays with a lot of like little sleight of hand with how much information it's revealing to us. And early on, there are kind of these passing lines that, if you linger on them, if the shot lingers on something for too long, like it kind of gives away the plot. So with the what they're pulling, they're kind of pulling a heist on us as an audience as much as they're doing it in the universe of the film at the same time. And it's those shots and those cuts to linger on information that matters most. And then coming back to that later on in the reveal, because now we're getting extra information with it. Like we're getting that extent of a cut. We're getting a longer look at something. And that longer look gives us more context. And suddenly we're putting the pieces together in our mind. You can kind of catch a little bit of it in when the SWAT team arrives, because the SWAT lead is absolutely just Brad Pitt trying to put on a different voice. And I think that's the closest that they come to really tipping their hand. But otherwise...
Buongiorno.
Yeah. Yeah. It just, they... When I think of editing in this movie, I think of like really clever little match cuts, and that there's this bit of it's early on in the movie. They have the zoom in across the waterfront in, I believe, Atlantic City. Like Danny has left the prison, and we get that like shot with him in the center of the frame walking towards the camera. It's cold, it's New Jersey, he needs a shave, he's wearing some old beat up suit. Cut to beautiful skyline of Atlantic City, the waterfront there. Looks gorgeous. Cut to another kind of repeated style of shot. Danny's in the center of the frame, coming up the escalator. Very fine suit, freshly shaved, beautiful casino lighting everywhere. It looks cool as hell. And it's kind of this, you get that repeated image to pull you along to remind us of like, oh, it's the same guy. This is who he really is. Stuff like that I really enjoy.
So then, I mentioned kind of in my opening summaries of the fact that, like, unlike a lot of music videos in the aughts, the cutting is not as jarring as one would expect it to be for a movie that is basically just montages, like, look over here, actually look over here, oh, actually, you should be looking here all along. But amongst that, you mentioned also that we get a lot of character building, despite those very quick, like, go, 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 go. How does the use of those very quick blink and you'll miss it frames impact the way we get to know these characters?
Cutting is a transition between shots, but it can be a transition between scenes. And Soderbergh uses these cuts to kind of, there's a call and response thing going on sometimes. So Danny and Rusty reconnect. They get the plans, the blueprints to the casinos. They start plotting their heist. And they say something like, oh, well, we're going to need money. Who are you thinking? Reuben? And then it immediately cuts to Elliot Gould in his robe and sunglasses going, are you out of your goddamn minds? And so the cut, the use of cutting, the use of editing here, it's priming us for that next moment. Like you're that call and response. You've got that introduction to a concept, and the conclusion to it is in the next shot, which is sometimes the next scene, which is sometimes, you know, in terms of narrative, is X amount of time later. Maybe it's a different geography. They've changed locations, changed settings, and using that kind of editing, that kind of cutting, it really helps set up who these characters are and what they're all about. But simultaneously, when you have all that rapid stuff, it's implying a lot. But then when you get those moments of release, and going back to the idea of rhythm and release, you have the rapid cuts, the edits, the transitions, all those different scenes. When you get those quiet little moments where a character's just kind of doing something, whether it's talking to someone else or doing part of their plan, we learn more about who they are in that moment. So, like a good one is they're doing the old casino demolition, the implosion, and it's a really like dynamically shot, huge crowd, building in the background. Danny and Linus are there because they're trailing Terry Benedict. Terry Benedict presses the button, and it cuts to like the entire crowd. They're all facing the camera. The entire crowd does like a 180 to look at the building, except for Danny and Linus, who keep looking at the screen, do not react at all to the explosion. Then we cut to Basher in the hotel, and he's watching it on TV as the casino is collapsing in the skyline behind him.
That was a good one.
Yeah, so you just and like with the implication there is like it's a good gag, but it's also like he's their explosives guy. So he's like, yeah, whatever. I'm watching the news while I'm doing something else.
Yeah.
So it's just it's little bits like that. I think when I think of character and edits here, and I'm rambling on a little bit, so I apologize for that. But I talked earlier about how there are almost no deleted scenes. Originally, when they all meet at Ruben's place, there's the shot of them arriving. Ruben opens the door, greets the entire crew when they come in, and then it immediately cuts to Danny's briefing them. In the finished movie, they added back in the little bits of like the characters riffing and interacting with each other. So Yen is building a house of cards. Is it Turk goes and starts trying to talk to Saul and says, you should come out to Utah, man. You'd really like it there. It's great. Little bits like that. And then you have Linus, who is, I think, like con artist from like a con artist dynasty, con artist family. He's Bobby Caldwell's kid. Refuses to come inside when Danny gives the pitch, like, you know, you're in or you're out. If you're out, no hard feelings. But if you're in, come on inside. And Linus is like still sitting outside. Ruben comes up to him and he's like, from Chicago, you're Bobby Caldwell's kid? He's like, yeah. Is it nice there? Yeah. That's great. Get in the goddamn house.
Yep. You see his hesitation and the presence that...
Yeah. So that was left on the floor. And without that, you don't get Linus as kind of like the rookie upstart kid. So his arc later on, where he loses his mind in the back of the van waiting for everyone else, and then has the slowest chase scene ever out of the research facility. Doesn't happen. You don't get that payoff. So, yeah, I think the power of the edit here is in it takes what would otherwise be like a really plot-heavy, talky, exposition-focused movie and really lets action and visual inform how we receive that information.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So then, if we're looking at editing both from a visual kind of story standpoint and from an audio standpoint, I'd like to pivot there because as we saw in movies like Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, the use of silence and the absence of noise and stimulation or whatever is very powerful. And one of the cool things in the assembling the crew section is we have a lot of different conversations with the different cast, right? But then when it's Saul's time to shine, we find Amal Clooney's husband, George Clooney, who plays Danny Ocean, approaches him at the dog track.
Yeah.
And is like, hey, man, I have a job. And he goes to walk away after Saul's like, no, thank you. And Saul is like, at least tell me what the job is. Because you're like, he's going to take it.
Yeah.
And then we lose all audio of their conversation. And it's literally just George handing the ticket over to Saul and walking away. Because he knows he's got him hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah.
And I feel like they do that throughout the film. Like, there are different parts where the audio cuts or the video changes or the music even. Because in the Las Vegas opening scenes, we get Elvis Presley.
Mm-hmm.
But near the end, we get Claire de la Lune, I believe, is what they end up playing at the end.
Yeah.
And that audio mixing, too, adds a lot, I think, of telling us when we're going to have, like, those exciting moments versus the quiet of the you've been satisfied with the truth. You're welcome. And then the romance with Tess and Danny.
Mm-hmm. I think you get, like... Yeah, the soundtrack is just so incredible. I believe it's David Holmes did the soundtrack for this movie. And it is very much that, like, it sounds like heist music. Mm-hmm. It probably sounds like heist music because of how iconic it is. And we all think of, like, heist music. Well, if it sounds like Ocean's 11, it's heist music. Yeah. It's shaped like itself. But yeah, you get those moments of there's so much happening, there's so much energy. And I think it comes back to rhythm and release. You have, like, it's such a busy movie, so much going on, that by the end, when you do have that, where the, like, all diegetic sound drops out, all the in-universe sound drops away. And then it's just beautiful classical music as they come out of the darkness into the light of the Bellagio fountain and have that, like, moment of, like, we did it, gang. It's beautiful, and it is such a, like, it's like a big exhale of breath in a sense, and you get that. Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. I think that use of sound there is incredible. Yeah, when you're talking about the scene with Saul as well, it's a really clever little bit because, like, we know we don't need to hear them say, this is what the job is. We know they have a job. They've got some crazy pitch. We have some of the detail already. If we're going to hear that again, it's redundant information for us. So in cases like that, they're finding an interesting way to, like, instead of it just being like, we got to go get Saul. Saul's a little reticent about this. Saul's got some poor health. We got to convince him somehow. Instead of it being this, like, talk-heavy scene, it's sparse on dialogue, and then it is just the roar of the crowd and the sound of the place that they're in that drowns all of that out, and then he's in. It would just be boring if we heard that dialogue, I think.
Yeah.
And I think, like, that's one of the things that Soderbergh talked about in the commentary as well, is this idea of, like, how are you conveying this information in a way that's interesting? Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of what this movie does exceptionally well, is give us a lot of information. I hate to say digestible, but, you know, like an easy to, like, you just really sink your teeth into it sort of way.
It's a very human kind of way, I think. Because, like, if you had a conversation between Danny and Saul, right, it would have been Danny being charming and convincing and telling us all of the things we already know, and Saul being like, no, I can't. That's, it's all behind me now. And Danny be like, come on, you missed the chase. And all of these things. And there'd probably be some tragic backstory somewhere. There'd probably be some, like, I'm so worried about my health and, like, blah, blah, blah. And then later on, we wouldn't get the tension of, oh my God, did this just kill Saul? Yeah. When he pretends to go down later on. Or we don't get the... Yeah, we just don't, we lose a lot. And I think this goes back to what I was saying about the fact that this movie, a lot of heist movies nowadays take themselves really seriously. This one doesn't. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also just because it's a movie. And I mean that to say, like, they're doing it, it's fun. It's not like this big dramatic story. It's just, it's a fun heist. Yeah. That they're just excited to get into because they're professionals and this is the thing that they love to do, which is kind of cool. Yeah. Right? Like, I
Yeah.
love me a professional at work, that's...
Yeah. And I think that's like half the fun is that when they're
Yeah.
recruiting the team, they're all bored to tears, really.
Mm-hmm.
Like Rusty is teaching, the young Hollywood stars of 2001 how to play poker, and they're bad at it, and he's bored to tears.
Yeah.
Danny, this is what Danny knows how to do. Danny's motivation is more to win Tess back, but
Yeah.
Frank is, Frank cannot work in casinos because, well, he can't work as Frank. He has to be Ramon,
Yes.
as his name tag says.
Mm-hmm.
Saul is just poor health. They call them the Mormon brothers, Virgil and Turk, are racing a monster truck against
Yes.
a remote controlled truck. Like they're just stuff like that. And
Yeah.
Linus is a character who clearly wants more but doesn't know where to get started. All that sort of stuff. So it's really fun. And yeah, oh god, and Basher says it'll be nice working with proper villains again. Because he like literally his introduction is him getting busted by the cops because his crew did not silence an alarm. So
Like fools.
yeah.
Amateurs.
Yeah. So it's just yeah, it's a great little the power of the edit helps us. It tells the story. Like it shapes the story and it shapes how we see these characters. And that's really what editing is all about, is shaping the narrative to tell that story.
Yeah. So one of the cool things about this movie, and maybe the original, but mostly this movie, I think, is how much it defined a lot of the heist genre,
Yeah.
right? Like, the original, it was fine. And, I've watched it. It's fine. But this one, because of, I think, that quick edit and that backwards and forwards and just the skill with which Soderbergh really, like, brought it to life, when I was rewatching this, because I'd watched it, years ago, I was like, oh, I'm just watching the D&D movie. That is the first thing I thought of. I was like, oh, George Clooney, you're just not a bard. Okay, cool. You're just go replace Chris. You guys could switch. It's fine. And I really appreciated that and how, like, translatable that whole heist vibe really comes to life in this and then proliferates.
Yeah. It's very, like, archetypal. Like, the characters are so broadly drawn in some ways that they're really easy to kind of... And again, like, the edit tells us more about the characters. But because of their introduction, how each of them are introduced, we kind of get a sense of what their deal is really quickly. And I love that. And they map so well to those archetypes that you kind of... This guy does the explosives. This guy's the leader. This guy's their tech guy. This guy's cars. This guy's the rookie. These two guys are those two guys.
The comic relief, perhaps?
The 20 questions scene in the van. It's like, are you a person? Yes. Are you living or dead? Living. Are you evil Knievel? Damn it. Just such a good bit. If we're talking about the original as well, you're saying it's fine. I don't think it's fine. I think the original's a bad movie. It's just it's just a vehicle for the Rat Pack to hang out together, and like not in like a fun way. I don't think Frank Sinatra is terribly charismatic on screen. Dean Martin maybe a bit more so. Sammy Davis Jr. maybe a bit more so. But like, I watched that movie and I had to look up the plot to it. I was just
really?
I was like, okay, yeah, they heist it, and then they have and it goes wrong, and they have to hide the cash because one guy dies. So they hide the cash in his coffin, and they give it to the guy's widow, and then she cremates the coffin, not realizing the cash was in there, and they all have that moment of like, well, that's our luck. Like, I guess it's fine. I'm bored to tears watching that version. It just
Fair.
It's so, and I think maybe it's a little unfair because of the 40-year difference between when these movies were made, but simultaneously I think isn't North by Northwest, I think that predates the original Ocean's 11.
Yes,
It's
I
same
think
sort of
that's
era
yeah.
and is much more engaging and exciting. Like things still happen in that. Whereas I feel
Yeah.
like there are a lot of kind of like half of the original Ocean's 11 is like them planning the heist, but it's really boring. Like it's not fun to watch. And then their heist is literally like, we just got to get in those casino cages with guns and we'll hold
Yep.
it up. Whereas this movie is explicitly non-violent. Like there's a question I think Rusty asks Danny about guns early on. Someone asks about guns. And it's like no guns. Like
Yep.
they just dismiss it. Gun. The only guns that are fired, I'm pretty sure, are the SWAT weapons, which are may not be real. Like they may be firing blanks, and then the police shooting out the tires of the decoy car.
True. Yeah.
The only person who gets hit by another person is Danny, and that's because the guy was like, "Oh, I'm sorry." It's like you're
He
supposed to
paid a
fake.
guy to punch
You
him.
pay
Yeah.
him to punt, to air quotes punch him, and then like two guards get knocked out with knockout gas. So I don't know. Like it's
I
yeah,
I feel like I have to say, like, it's unfair to compare anything to North by Northwest because it's Alfred Hitchcock and he's like the man with timing. Like, quite
yeah,
honestly, that's just rude.
yes,
But like, I do understand because there's a, I mean, there's a snappiness to
yeah,
this with all of these quick edits where because we're seeing the different parts of the heist instead of just having it all in one like 40-minute chunk,
yeah,
you get a lot more of that pacing. You get to see more parts of the group. Because, like, if you have one big scene or one continuous story that doesn't do that jumping around, it's a very different vibe, right? Like, you're a lot more prone to quiet. You're a lot more prone to, like, focus on one person or one or two people. Whereas here, because we have that choppy edit, it's more like, oh, you get 30 seconds of Don Cheadle's character making a bomb while watching a demolition on TV. And you get that for like a split second, but you learn something about him, and then
yeah,
you pivot to someone else.
yeah,
And those quick cuts let us get to know people a lot better, like you said.
yeah, yeah. It's just yeah. You're right. It is probably unfair to compare. It's. I remember that there was kind of like some hand wringing. I was a kid, so I'm probably misremembering to some extent. But there's some hand wringing over like, it's another remake. Uh, it's a remake in like the loosest sense of the term. Like Danny Ocean
Yep.
is trying to win back his ex-wife and also do a heist. Is about that's kind of where the similarities end.
Yeah.
They're very different stories, very different movies. Truly love this movie. This is easily one of my favorite movies of all time.
And it kicked off a heck of a franchise. Like,
Yeah,
we talked early on about Star Wars, and that kicked off, the Star Wars empire.
yeah.
But Ocean's 11 has, what, 6 movies? Something like that?
So there are the three. There's like the trilogy that Soderbergh did with this core cast. There's Ocean's 8, which is the all-female cast
Yeah.
with Kate Blanchett, Sandra Bullock,
Rihanna, I believe. is
Rihanna,
in that as well.
Awkwafina, Anne Hathaway.
God, it was so good.
Who
I
else
loved
is
that
in
one,
that?
but anyway.
Remember, Richard Armitage is the bad guy, loosely. Yeah,
I'm not sure. But yeah, so we had
yeah,
that one. We also had Ocean's 12, Ocean's 13, so that was the original trilogy. So okay, it was only 4 movies, but even still, like, it kicked off also, I mean, I think we already talked about this a bit. It was foundational to a lot of others,
yeah,
right? So it might not have the same legs as Star Wars, but what does, to be
yeah.
honest? Speaking of things to be unfair to compare to. But still, like, it was, I think to your point, very, because the characters were very, I'm gonna say cookie cutter, but not in a bad way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have the safe guy, you have the pickpocket, you
Yeah.
have the talker, etc. You can just kind of mix and match that in D&D land, in,
Well,
all sorts of things.
yeah, like the storytelling power of these archetypes, like these
Mhm.
kind of like, yeah, exactly. There's a universality to it in a sense.
Yeah. It's a good movie overall. I don't know. I feel like there's so much to unpack with the editing stuff, but also it's hard to get into every instance without being like, okay, let's look at this one exact scene when they do this one thing. Like,
Yeah,
for example, Yen's whole thing going from being stuck in the box. So Yen gets locked in a little lockbox to be brought into the room because he is a contortionist and or acrobat. But the suitcase with the gems, quote unquote, is placed on top of it. And so we get the drama of that is not immediately resolved until later on when he removes himself from the box and has to catch it by the chain that is on it, which is so cool. And those moments that you've pointed out too of like tension
yeah,
and that creation of tension
yeah,
that is left unsatisfied for however long, I think are pivotal to some of that, because they're not big things,
yeah,
but they are just small enough bites of
yeah,
tension that they add up to something bigger, which is a lot of fun.
yeah. Well, that scene in particular, Soderbergh was, again, I'm talking about the commentaries here. Soderbergh talked about how he wishes that he put another scene of Yen in the vault there,
Mm-hmm.
but that kind of like showed him getting his hand clear when they're about to blow the vault, because his bandaged hand gets stuck,
Yep.
and he's trying to get away before they blow the explosives.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and he wishes that he showed like that he had another bit of Yen getting clear, but then the tension was like, did he get far enough away versus
Right.
because he felt bad that the joke was kind of predicated on like, did we just blow up this character we care about? Like, so,
Yeah.
which is, completely valid. And yeah, there's another bit that I'm thinking of now. When Rusty is giving the poker lessons in the back room of the bar or wherever, and Topher Grace playing himself says like,
Yeah.
they're doing the hands, and Rusty's trying to teach them how to bet and how to do poker hands, and Topher Grace is like, oh yeah, well, check it out, read them and weep, and throws down his cards like, all reds, man. And it just like, it's Rusty framed like dead center, head on, and he's just staring like slack jawed, like, this is my life now. And it match cuts to him at the bar, the noisiest bar ever, and he's just got his drink there, and it's like the funniest, like, just really reinforcing like this guy is bored as can be with his life right now.
Yep.
Yeah, and just tons of little details like that, like uh Terry Benedict's last scene is the close in on him, the camera's pushing in on his face as the elevator doors close, and it cuts to black,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's the crew coming out of the dark into the light, at the very end, set to Claire de Lune. Like, that's a lovely little like you're pushing in on black, pulling out from black. Love little edits like that. It's wonderful, and I guess, like, speaking of editing, when you don't make a cut also matters. So most of Rusty and Danny's scenes together play out with them just like it's just a two shot. They're both on screen at the same time, living in the space, and it's typically an extended take. And that was done just because Brad Pitt and George Clooney had excellent banter and dynamics on screen together. So they just
Yeah.
let the cameras run, and it works so well. There's an energy to so much of this movie that warms my heart. This is I cannot stress enough how much I love this movie.
I mean, I don't blame you, because it is, like I said at the top, just a bunch of people having fun at their job. And whether that's the thieves or the actors, it doesn't really matter, because it's just the facts. And I remember seeing recently an interview with Matt Damon where he talked about how much the movie industry has changed. So you don't often get like weird experimental kind of kitschy stuff anymore, because it's just too big a bet for a lot of studios to make for the returns that they get in like streaming land. And I'm so glad they got to make this movie before that happened, because I don't think this movie would be made nowadays, because it feels too cozy and too small. Like, and I don't mean that in a bad way, because, like, to your point, not a single gun except for the shooting out of the tires showed up, because they just were smart about it. Whereas most heist movies nowadays is like, oh, we'll go in and assassinate this whole hallway of people, and it'll be all these different... And you're like, no, just steal the thing. Just steal the... I don't need to see multiple people die. Just steal the thing. And you're smarter because you don't have to kill anybody.
Yeah.
Like, they're not... Because it's funny because Basher calls them villains, but, like, they don't kill anyone. And that's so much a hallmark nowadays in film, I think, where we just kind of hand wave, oh, the goons... The goons have died, and you're like, that's not... I don't want the goons to all be dead. Like, I hope their boss gave them insurance.
Yeah, the original movie, I think, had the tagline of, like, in any other town, they'd be the bad guys. Mm-hmm. Because the house always wins. So there's an element of, like, sticking it to the man. But it's also important to note that Ruben is also, like, a casino mogul. Yeah. He's just been forced out by Benedict, and but like Ruben's a good version of that. Benedict is very much explicitly like coded to be controlling and maybe not outright villainous until the second movie, but like he does not show affection with Tess in public because someone's always watching. But it's like, it's your casino, dude. Like, those are your cameras that you're hiding from. The second Danny shows back up at the casino, he's like, okay, hired goons, go beat them up. So it's just, it is very much meant to be escapist and light entertainment. And I think I really enjoy it for that, because it's an incredibly well done movie while being very light, very fun.
Yeah. So one thing as we get close to the end is I wanna talk about Benedict for a sec, because I think Danny and Benedict, the way the two of them are shown is really interesting, particularly in relation to Tess, right? Where that's what we're being set up for. And the fact that Danny Ocean will steal $160 million using her as kind of the... almost as an alibi, quite frankly, because he gets put into an uncameraed room to be beaten up on her behalf, sort of, for just being around, versus, Benedict, who is caught on camera saying, like, I would trade her for the money. The fact that she just blindly accepts that, I know that's like, we're tying the bow on the movie. Mm-hmm. But it's so interesting to me that little snapshot of their relationship. Because, like, Danny has been lying this whole time, over and over and over again. And it does not occur to her for a single second that Terry Benedict is lying about the money. It doesn't occur to her for a hot second. And I can't tell if that is a reflection of her knowledge of Terry, of being like, I know you would trade me for this money, but the fact that you said it out loud is really gross. Or if this is a reflection of her, of being like, I would rather the man that lies to everybody else but me, or something, with Danny. I don't know. It's an interesting relationship snapshot that teaches us a lot about who they are as people. Yeah. So I don't know. It was a cool touch.
Yeah, they kind of Well, the scene where he goes and meets up with her again, it's an incredible scene. Like, the performances are so good. And she is just, like, acerbic in how she is responding to everything he's saying. Like, he's trying to be like, I miss you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Except, I mean, he's trying to be cool and charming and everything. And she's just completely rebuffing everything he throws at her. And was it, he says, like, does he make you laugh? And she's like, well, he doesn't make me cry.
Yep.
It was like, ooh, that stings.
The pain.
Yeah. So, yeah, it is an interesting thing, but it's... I was talking to my wonderful partner about this movie, and she was saying that it's weird that we are kind of rooting for the thieves, quote unquote, the bad guys.
Well, of course.
And it's like, yeah, I guess it is. But also, I don't think about it that much when I watch the movie.
I mean, that's fairly common, right?
Yeah.
We're often given, I mean, like I mentioned at the top, we're watching Penguin right now, and like, neither he nor Sophia are good people.
Mm-hmm.
But you end up rooting for them, right?
Yeah.
Like,
well, it's like, yeah. I mean, The Sopranos ran for
of course
so many seasons, and everyone's like, boy, what an interesting character. So, yeah.
I do also wonder if it helps that it's robbing a casino.
Yeah.
Because a casino is not a person.
Yeah.
A casino is a big conglomerate.
The house
nowadays.
always wins.
Yeah.
You're getting one over on them.
And they're insured, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
His premiums will go up. Oh no. So Ben, that's taking us to the end just about. So talk to me about why this is the movie to watch for, how much editing can do to tell a story.
Yeah. If you want to see just how much the power of editing shapes a movie, the narrative, its themes, what it's trying to tell you, I think this movie does such a beautiful job of all of that. Whether it's transitioning from scene to scene, highlighting character, giving you visual eye candy, something interesting to look at, or just displaying action on screen. I think this movie just is a masterclass in how editing propels a story forward and how it carries you through a movie.
Yeah.
So far, if you're looking to just watch something for the fun of it, why watch this one?
It is quick-paced without being overwhelming. It is simple without being boring. The cast is incredible, of course. And if you really just want to see a bunch of people having a really good time, I think this is a good movie for it. And bonus, if you are one of those people that like have your phone out when you're doing a thing and you're listening but you're not necessarily watching, you could in theory get the whole thing from start to finish without your phone or without like looking at it all of the time. But I don't think you'll want to, because it is kind of a to your point, a bit of an eye candy. Not just the actors, but the whole setup. And seeing all those bits and pieces come together at the end is just so satisfying. For a Friday night, to be sure. And that's it. That's all for today. So you can find this podcast at Coffee Kurosawa Pod on Instagram, Blue Sky as coffeeandkurosawa.bluesky.social, and as Coffee and Kurosawa on Facebook. You can also find us on Patreon. You can find me at Farrah Sarpkaya on Insta and Threads, and at sarpkaya.ca, where I lend my voice as a voice actor. I've even gotten myself a TikTok. Whether I am a frequent updater on that remains to be seen, but you can catch me there too. Ben, where can the people find you on the socials?
Folks can find me on Letterboxd as Benjimon. Other social media to be determined. One day I'll have a steady, stable answer to this question, but it is not today.
Incredible. And, can you believe it? The end of season one here at Coffee and Kurosawa Pod. Thank you all so much for joining us as we tried to figure out this podcasting thing, and we cannot wait for all the cool movies coming in 2025. We'll see you soon.
And if I could go back and edit everything I just said, I would just include